Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY. Now, before we get started on this Rally Dash, I have some bad news about the Rally Dash project. And that news is that I am not going to be finishing it. And I know that'll probably disappoint a lot of you, but the closer and closer I got to this thing being completed, the less and less I actually liked how it looked. I really liked the picture that I originally showed you guys, but with the curve and the dash on this Mark I and everything kind of just, and as I'm working on it, it's just, I don't like how it looks. I don't like my gauges way off on the side there, and I ended up not really liking the idea of reconfiguring a lot of those switches as I started to get into it. So, sorry to disappoint you guys, but I am going to be shelving the Rally Dash and I'm not going to be finishing this project. I don't normally like to admit defeat, and I don't know that I would consider this exactly admitting defeat because I don't really like how it looks now. It's funny how opinions can change, and as you start to get into a project, it kind of shifts. But what I am going to do to finish out this series, this Rally Dash series, is I am going to kind of rework, rewire, and clean up the existing dash. The way it was laid out already wasn't bad looking or anything like that, but I do have these new gauges and I should use them. So, you know, I had that dual gauge that I took out, I had that clock in there, and I think that I'm going to switch back to a water temp gauge and an oil pressure gauge on the sides of my center dash binnacle. And then on the side there where I have my speaker and the fuel ratio gauge and the old temp gauge, the digital one that I am just going to be tossing, this is not what I want to use anymore. I will be putting the clock and my air fuel ratio meter. So let's get back out there. Let's start cleaning up this wiring and get this thing ready for the old dash and the old components. Sorry again if you were really into seeing this completed. I want to apologize to those of you that were looking forward to it, but let's head back out there and get back to work. Now the first thing that I need to do in order to get this all cleaned up is to take out some of this wiring that I don't need anymore, wire up new stuff, and then I'm going to rewrap this stuff so it looks like a really nice complete wiring harness and wiring loom. I got to terminate some of these hot lines that I'm not going to be using anymore, and just general cleanup in here. You know, if I am going to be redoing the dash, I want everything to look really sharp, really clean. So let's get to it. Alright, so since I'm not doing the whole full-fledged dash up here, and I'm just going to be doing that center gauge with the two on the side, the way I'm going to have that laid out is I'm going to have my oil pressure on this side and my water temp on this side instead of my clock and then the dual gauge over here. And then I'll have my speedometer as normal. I'm going to put the speaker box back in here, and I'm going to put the other box over here with the speaker, and it had two holes for gauges, and instead of the old temp gauge, what I'll be doing is taking that old temp gauge and throwing it away, and then I'll be replacing it with the clock and my air fuel ratio. Alright, so let's start putting these gauges back in our dash cluster here. Now this dash cluster, if you've not used one of these before, is both pretty cool and incredibly frustrating, because once you get everything in here, the only way to really get everything back out, because that's up right there, the only way to get everything back out is to take this thing out again. So as you're getting all of this stuff done, make sure that if you want to clean this, if you want to run any special wires or like sound deadening on the bottom of this or anything like that, that you do it while it's out, because you will thank yourself a lot in the future if you get it done before it goes into the car. That looks pretty damn good. I mean, obviously I had magnolia gauges in this before, but I'm feeling better about the fact that I'm choosing to go back to this style as opposed to the full rally dash that I was doing before. So now I know that this new gauge that I got actually runs off of a lower voltage, and this little voltage stabilizer right here is what they use to power the different gauges that are in your cluster, at least on the Mark 1. I'm not quite sure how it's changed on the newer models, but that's the general idea. This is what I do whenever I do electrical work, especially on this dash cluster, because I always forget how all this stuff is laid out. The best way to prevent myself from forgetting these things is by taking pictures. So I've taken a picture of all of the gauge cluster stuff down here to make sure that I plug it all in correctly when it goes back in. So what I think I'm going to have to do is splice in a wire on this plug right here, because one side of this is the 12 volt signal that goes in, and then the other side is the not 12 volt signal. Now, one thing that I'm doing here in all of this is I'm also going to be running lights to all of these because they got to be illuminated. And the ones that are on the side of my dash cluster here are also going to need to have lights associated with them. The AEM gauge is already set up to have lights on it, so I don't have to add any special ones to that. That is always illuminated. It's an LED bulb, blah, 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 blah. It's unimportant. But I have to run a wire to the other gauges because these were already illuminated. The one on the left isn't. And I am using a replacement LED bulb for these old-fashioned halogen bulbs. This is a push-in bulb, and it works on the press-in type bulb receivers. I know that they do have screw-in ones too. I'm going to try and find links to these. If I did find them, they'll be in the description of this video. But these are super bright. They look really good at night, and I'm going to set this one up to illuminate over here on the other gauge that's with my speaker. So now we might actually be able to go ahead and put this back in the car and start wiring everything up. Now the old gauge cluster is this right here, and I am going to set this up like this, and I'm going to set up my clock. Since I already have a hole there, got Mr. Clock. And then my fuel ratio gauge, which is somewhere around here, looking good. So let's get this stuff back out there, set up some cameras, and see if we can get this stuff wired back up and working properly. Now, one thing that I cannot impress upon you enough is that, especially when you're doing wiring like this, that it's so worth it to spend a little extra time and wire things properly and test everything. Because if you get all the stuff back together and then one little thing doesn't work, not only is it incredibly frustrating, but it adds a ton of additional work for you because you got to take everything back apart and do it all over again. So, perfect example, I've run a whole bunch of additional lighting for the front, dash and so that it lights up properly. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the headlights on, and I can see here that all of these bulbs are working. When I first turned them on, and you probably saw in the time lapse that some of these bulbs didn't work. And if I hadn't tested that and I put it all back together, I would have found it out way too late and it'd been really frustrating. So, little pro tip for you, test, 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 test. So, let's start putting this stuff back in here. I've got my dash cluster here that we're going to go ahead and press in, and then we can start laying things out and plugging everything back in, and hopefully everything works on the first try. One thing I did upgrade while I was here is my oil pressure line, and you'll see this is actually a braided line. This is something that 7 Mini Parts sells, and it's just a slightly nicer hose. Normally you have like a copper line or a plastic line that runs to the back of your oil pressure gauge if it's mechanical, and it screws in and as you get more pressure, the gauge goes up and shows you that you have pressure. Now, I had a copper line before, and I'd love to say that I took it out without messing it up, but I took it out and I think I might have sprung a leak in it, so I thought, well, why not go ahead and replace it while I'm here with this nice stainless line and this braided line, and now I know that it'll always work, and this is a little bit more flexible. It lets me move my gauge cluster around a little bit while it's up here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and conceal these wires, and then I'm going to put my gauge cluster back up. Now, I'm not sure that there is an easy way for me to show you me reconnecting everything on the back of this, and I'm not sure that it's going to be that exciting for you anyway. So I'm going to do a quick jump cut to where we're putting the speakers back in. Now, you should be able to see on the right-hand side here, I actually put this other side in already. I forgot to set up my camera and start filming this, so sorry in advance. But there's not a whole lot of fancy stuff going on over there. I literally just have power going to my clock, and then I plugged in my AEM gauge. So I just got to put the speaker holder back on this side, and I got to take this out completely to do that, and then I'll be able to put both of my speakers back in here, and then we'll be ready to roll. As is the tradition, in the middle of these time lapses, we're going to be doing our customer showcase. Alright, so today on the Classic Mini DIY Customer Showcase, brought to you by Total Car Reviews, we have a beautiful 1977 Australian Leyland Mini. It's a 998cc, and it is beautiful. It's got that stub nose on the front with the kind of like Euro style grille. I absolutely love that grille style. It really just screams European to me, even more so than the stock round nose Minis do. I'd love to have one of those stub nose Minis at some point in my life, but the part that really grabbed me about this car is that the doors are the Mark I doors with the external hinges, and they have roll-down windows. It's one of those things that when you look at the car, you know immediately that it's an Australian Mini. For those of you that don't know, the Australian Minis actually came original with roll-down windows on the Mark Is. This is not something that the rest of the world had. I think that New Zealand might have also had it, but that portion of the world, they were the only ones who got the roll-down windows on the Mark I doors with those external hinges. I've said many times that I'd love to switch out my doors for Australian doors, but there's always that cost associated with it, and of course I'd have to ship those Australian doors to the United States, and then my Mini wouldn't technically be original, so you know, it's one of those things that I always want to do, but at the same time, I probably won't ever do just because of the cost. But every time I see it, I get so jealous because it gets so hot down here in Charlotte during the summer. I mean, if you guys haven't been somewhere in the south of the United States during the summer, it is, oh my God, it's so hot. It's just crazy humid, and these doors, these Mark I doors with the roll-down windows would be incredible during the summer here. Now, I don't know if I've said who this Mini belongs to, but it's a viewer named Eileen Hadida. So thanks so much for submitting your Mini to Customer Showcase. And if you guys are interested in joining this Customer Showcase and me featuring your car on one of my episodes, send an email below to the email address that I have popping up on the screen somewhere. You can send me a picture, you can send me a video, whatever works best for you, and I will feature your car, I promise. I've got a few in the backlog, and as I start working through those, if you send me your Mini, it will get featured on an episode at some point. But for now, let's get back to the Rally Dash project, or I guess the lack of the Rally Dash project, and we'll keep going on that. All right, so the next step is to turn this key and see if everything connected up correctly and is working. I can test some of this stuff already because it has power all the time, like the clock. And this one obviously works. It's way off, so I'll have to reset that. And then the rest of it still needs to be tested with the car on and the ignition on. So here we go. Fuel pump. Ignition light, air fuel meter. Let's give it a turn over. See what happens. Alright, so the oil pressure gauge worked for a second. It came back up there. Maybe it's just working the air out. Let's try that again. I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but the air intake is super loud without the filters on it. Let me get it closer so you can hear. Alright, so I'm going to let this warm up and then I'll check this water gauge here in a minute to see if that's working properly. Alright, so one thing I noticed, and you probably can't see it in there, but this little oil sensor here, the oil gauge is leaking a little bit, so I'll have to take that off and tighten it back down. And the same is said for the front piece here. You can actually see that line of oil leaking down and running down below the oil pressure gauge. So we'll take those off, seal them better, maybe use some of that Teflon tape that plumbers use, and then we'll try this again. Now for those of you who haven't seen me put that in my car before, that is actually like a Firewall sound deadening blanket. And while it doesn't look amazing, this thing makes your car so much quieter. There is so much sound that comes through this panel right here in your car, it would blow your mind. I bought this from 7 Mini Parts probably maybe like 1.5 years, actually it might be 3 years ago now. And it's just stuck in my car since then. It is seriously one of the best things that I ever purchased for this car. It makes things so quiet. Alright, so that's it for Classic Mini DIY today. I am filming this ending sequence on my phone because of my broken microphone. But thanks for joining me for this Rally Dash project. Even though I didn't finish it, I am really happy with the way it all turned out. So for the ending sequence today, I will be doing a little montage of the whole dash, how it's laid out now, and how it looks with all of those new gauges. So until the next motor rebuild video, motor on!